why are so-called black people labeled as black when their skin is not? Before we begin, pause for a moment. Look at the human body, your skin. Every shade is a variation of brown. Light brown, copper brown, chestnut brown, deep earthy brown. Most so-called black people do not have black skin at all. Their skin ranges from light caramel to deep mahogany, from bronze to rich brown. Yet the world insists on one word, black, a word that does not describe color, but a label shaped by history. And yet, a whole population has been assigned a color that does not match their biology. Look closely at your skin. Where did this label come from? Who decided it? And why has it followed millions of people across centuries, continents, and cultures, regardless of their actual skin tone? This video will take you through the origins of the term black, how it became attached to African peoples, and the deeper psychological, social, and spiritual consequences of being named something you are not. Of the label, the lies attached to it, and the spiritual identity that existed long before color categories were created. People everywhere take pride in this classification, even though it is not their true identity, because names are powerful. Labels shape identities, and understanding the language forced upon a people is the first step toward reclaiming the truth about who they really are. Why? Why were millions of people grouped under a label that does not describe their actual appearance? What purpose did it serve? And more importantly, who benefited from it? Long before the terms black and white existed, people were identified by nation, tribe, culture, and lineage, not by color. Color was never a primary identity until Europe needed it to be. When Kamala Harris was suddenly positioned within the presidential race, something very telling happened. Almost overnight, people from my ethnic group, my people, began to claim her as one of us, tying her to our heritage, despite the facts showing something entirely different. We hear statements such as, if Vice President Harris becomes the nominee, she will be the first black woman. Yet Kamala Harris is of South Asian and Caribbean descent, not of the heritage historically labeled as black in the United States. Major media outlets reinforced this narrative. Reporters entered black communities, speaking to black women about the historic opportunity to vote for another so-called black woman into the highest office in America. If someone chooses to live in ignorance, they may accept this narrative without question. But the truth is simple. Kamala Harris is not black, nor does she share the heritage of the people classified as black in the United States or anywhere else in the world. What we are seeing now is an even broader erasure. The powers that be are no longer distinguishing anyone at all. Instead, they are collapsing all identities into a single, vague term: people of color. Everyone is now a person of color. At the same time, there is heavy emphasis on the word first. But we must stop and ask, first of what exactly? When everyone is grouped under a generic label, the group historically labeled black is simultaneously used and erased. This erasure is made easy because people are no longer identified by heritage, but only by skin color. Take President Obama as another example. He was labeled the first black president, yet he does not share the same heritage as the descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. Obama and Kamala Harris are not our kin. But due to decades of indoctrination, many people are easily misled and emotionally manipulated into believing they are. Some may ask, why is it wrong to say black people, but acceptable to say white people? That question actually exposes the problem. White is the only other major group in the world commonly classified by skin color. However, and this is key, they still know exactly who they are. I have never met someone identified as white who does not know where their family comes from. Many can trace their ancestry to specific European nations, and there are countless stories of European immigrants arriving in America and becoming established over generations. In contrast, people classified as black in America are collectively labeled African. Africa, a vast continent made up of countless nations, tribes, languages, and cultures, is reduced to a single, meaningless identifier. No other group in the world is treated this way. Asians know precisely where they come from. A Chinese person is not Indian. A Korean is not Japanese. They take offense when lumped together because they know their heritage, and that is the crucial difference. The problem is not color alone. The problem is the loss of heritage, the erasure of identity, and the acceptance of labels that were never meant to describe, but to diminish. There are correct examples in the Bible of how people were identified. A perfect example appears in the New Testament, where a Roman soldier compels Simon of Cyrene, a man identified by his homeland in Africa, to help Yahawashi carry his cross to Golgotha. In those days, names such as Ethiopian, Cushite, Libyan, or Nubian were common, but black was never an identity. The word black was not a description, it was a classification, a social invention, a tool designed during slavery and colonialism to divide humanity into ranks, to justify what could never be justified. Before Europe created racial color codes, people were identified by their tribe, nation, family line, and language. A person was Nubian, Ashanti, Igbo, Ethiopian, Maasai, Yoruba, or Akan. Identity was rooted in culture and heritage, not color. Even in Europe, people were not called white. They were English, French, Dutch, Portuguese, or German. No civilization in ancient history defined entire populations simply by color. The idea of grouping millions under a single color didn't exist because it didn't make sense. Colonial powers created the racial label black with a deliberate purpose. It was designed to build a new social order, a system of mass indigenous subjugation organized by skin color and wealth. There is a deliberate agenda at work behind this system. And while everyone needs to understand the truth, no one needs this awakening more than those who have been defined, restricted, and targeted through this very classification. The classification system based on skin color was developed during the 18th and 19th centuries by European scientists and thinkers as a framework to create racial hierarchies, which was used to justify the enslavement and mistreatment of people of African descent. In the United States, enslaved Africans were initially identified by their specific ethnic groups, e.g. Igbo, Yoruba, but colonists generally ignored these affiliations. The terms Negro and colored became standard identifiers, including among African Americans themselves, until the mid-20th century. During the American Civil Rights Movement in the late 1960s, a significant shift occurred. Activists and community leaders, such as Stokely Carmichael, promoted the term black as a self-chosen term symbolizing racial pride, militancy, and a rejection of the status quo associated with the former labels. This was a deliberate effort to instill a new, powerful, and unifying identity. The use of the term black for identifying people of African descent evolved from a descriptive term to a powerful self-chosen identity. It originated from the association of the color black with dark skin. Still, its use as a racial category was a socio-political construct developed during the era of the transatlantic slave trade to categorize and dehumanize enslaved Africans. So, where did the term black come from for identifying people with melanin? When European scholars and lawmakers built racial categories, they attached moral meanings to colors. White became purity, innocence, superiority. Black became darkness, danger, inferiority. And over generations, many began to internalize these ideas even when they were unspoken, even when they were false. So the real question is not simply, why are black people called black? The deeper question is, what happens to a people when the world labels them something they are not, and then teaches them to believe it? Historical origins and usage, and the descriptive term. The English word black comes from the Old English word blek, which referred to the color or darkness. In early use, it was a descriptive adjective for people with dark hair or a swarthy complexion, without the later racial connotations. Colonial racial label. During the early 17th century, European, specifically Spanish and Portuguese, slavers used the term Negro, which means black in their languages, derived from the Latin niger, as a label for people from Africa whom they enslaved. The label black began in Europe, not Africa. This adjective was turned into a noun and used indiscriminately as a racial identifier for all people of African origin, erasing their diverse ethnic and cultural identities, e.g., Yoruba, Igbo, Akan. The English word black became the direct translation and equivalent of Negro in this context. The use of black as a racial term was central to developing a racial hierarchy during the Enlightenment, where blackness was negatively contrasted with whiteness, which was associated with purity, goodness, and superiority. This ideology helped justify the institution of slavery and the systemic oppression of people of African descent. During the 1400s and 1500s, European travelers encountered African nations with deep brown skin. They described them in terms of darkness, not because of color accuracy, but because of symbolism. In European culture, black symbolized danger, impurity, evil, the unknown, the inferior, while white symbolized purity, holiness, superiority, civilization. These meanings existed long before Europeans ever reached Africa. So when they encountered dark-skinned people, the symbolism transferred automatically. This was not science. This was ideology. In this system, society was color-coded. At the top were those with white skin who imagined themselves the supreme, superior master class, entitled to all privilege and power. In the middle were people of various shades, given a conditional and fragile status. At the bottom, on the lowest, most undignified rung, were those labeled black. This system was never natural. It was engineered. The transatlantic slave trade transformed symbolic colors into legal racial categories. In the 1600s and 1700s, colonial governments in America and the Caribbean needed a system to justify slavery. They needed to make the enslavement of African people appear natural, permanent, and God-ordained. So they created a racial world with only two primary colors: white equal master, superior, human; black equal slave, inferior, property. Colonial laws officially use the term black not as a description, but as a legal status. Being labeled black meant you could be owned. You could not testify against whites. You could not learn to read. Your children inherited your enslaved status. You were considered less than human. The colonizers needed the middle class to maintain control. If the world had only two categories, white and black, the numerical majority, the indigenous Africans, would have overwhelmed the minority settler class. So a buffer layer was created. People placed above blackness but below whiteness, rewarded with small privileges, simply because they were not categorized as black. This generated division, resentment, and competition between groups. A classic divide-and-rule strategy. Apartheid in South Africa and racial segregation in America were not accidental policies. They were mechanisms to enforce this color-coded order through law, isolation, and everyday practice. The aim was to entrench a racial hierarchy and to create a permanent buffer between the white minority and the black majority. and we can see the effects. For more than 365 years in South Africa, this race and wealth class system has survived, adapting to new political structures but continuing silently in social life. It may not appear in law books today under democracy, but people of color still experience it daily. The truth is undeniable. The racist class system is still very much alive, just reshaped. As someone placed in the buffer zone, the colored identity, we should endeavor to keep looking toward a future where this colonial class system is dismantled completely. A future where we no longer identify ourselves by racial codes invented by settlers, but instead embrace our true African Hebrew Israelite identities under the broader umbrella of sub-Saharan Africa. Within that umbrella, each of us should have the freedom to express our distinct heritage, be it Kamisa African, Bantu African, Khoi, San, anything except the imposed color labels designed to divide us. The one-drop rule. In the United States, this concept was reinforced by the one-drop rule, a legal principle later outlawed in 1967 that classified anyone with any African ancestry as black, further solidifying a racial caste system. The color became a cage. Millions of brown-skinned Africans were forced into a category invented to keep them subjugated. This is how color became their destiny, modern reclamation and identity. The term was widely considered a slur or an offensive term for centuries, with Negro or colored being the more accepted formal terms, e.g., as used by Martin Luther King Jr. in his 1963 I Have a Dream speech. A significant shift occurred in the 1960s and 1970s during the civil rights and Black Power movements. African Americans began to embrace the term black as a chosen identifier, symbol of racial pride, power, and solidarity, actively moving away from terms associated with subjugation. Today, black is widely accepted, often capitalized to recognize it as a shared and distinct cultural and political identity, and it can be used interchangeably with or as a broader alternative to African American. When a label is repeated generation after generation, it becomes part of identity. Lesser intelligence, moral inferiority, ugliness, savagery, danger, lack of civilization. These lies came from colonial writings, missionary teachings, scientific racism, and political propaganda. The term black, used to identify people of African descent, originated from European encounters during the era of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. It was a descriptive label based on skin pigmentation that evolved into a racial identifier used to categorize people and justify systems of power and oppression. And over time, many internalized it. Even today, many people of African descent unconsciously view themselves through a label that was never theirs to begin with. And because the word black carries negative symbolism, people absorb those meanings without realizing it. Scientifically speaking, black people do not have black skin. Human skin contains melanin in two forms: pheomelanin, red/yellow; eumelanin, brown/black. Even the darkest skin tones are extremely dark brown, not black. The English word black comes from the Old English word blek, black dark, which is related to the Proto-Germanic blakaz, burned. The Spanish and Portuguese use the word negro, which literally means black in their languages, derived from the Latin niger, as a simple descriptive adjective for the Bantu and West African peoples they encountered. Evolution of usage and identity. The term black is a social invention with no biological foundation. Yet people still carry the weight of the word as if it defines their worth. Today, black, often capitalized to recognize a shared identity and culture, and African American are used with black generally being the broader term, encompassing people of African descent from various places, including the Caribbean and Africa, who may not identify as African American. The term, therefore, originated as a descriptive and later a racialized label imposed by colonizers, but was later embraced and redefined by people of African descent as a powerful marker of shared identity and pride. Know this, that before the Arab and European invasions of Africa, before land was seized, resources extracted, and entire nations subjugated, there was no such racial identity as a black person. For anyone unsure about the colonial origins of the label black, I encourage you to research the following. 1. Ancient descriptions. Sub-Saharan Africans were called Ethiopians, burnt-faced, Nubians, Cushites, terms based on region, not race. 2. Arab and European influence. Colonizers introduced terms like Negro and black, initially descriptions, later stereotypes loaded with racism. 3. The evolution of black. The English word comes from Latin niger and Old English blek, color words that eventually became racial categories. 4. Modern reclaiming. African American, Afro-Caribbean, and Pan-African movements later reclaimed the word black as a symbol of unity, pride, and resistance. In conclusion, the identity black did not originate in Africa. It was constructed through colonization, slavery, and apartheid, and only later transformed into a term of collective pride and solidarity. Understanding this history empowers us to reclaim deeper, pre-colonial identities rooted in nation, culture, and heritage, not in a color code designed to divide us. We have traveled through history, identity, and language, and one truth stands clear. The label black was never our beginning. It was never our name. It was never our choice. It was a structure created to divide us, to position us, and to limit who we could become. But knowing the truth gives us power. Power to question, power to heal, power to reclaim. We are not the inventions of colonial systems. We are not the colors they forced upon us. We are descendants of nations, kingdoms, cultures, and lineages far older than the word black. And so, I invite you to imagine a future where Africans identify by heritage, not hierarchy, by culture, not color, by unity, not imposed divisions. A future where Sub-Saharan African, Bantu, Khoi, San, Kamisa, and countless other identities stand proudly in their fullness. A future where the settler-created class system finally collapses under the weight of truth. Because when we reclaim our names, we reclaim our story. And when we reclaim our story, we reclaim our destiny. Thank you for watching. If this message opened your eyes, please like and share it and join the movement toward reclaiming your identity, beyond the color code. Also, remember to hit the notification bell so you will know when news lessons are uploaded. Until next time, walk in truth, wisdom, and freedom. Shalom.